Hello there, welcome back to another Star Wars What If reaction. Today we're reacting to what if the Clone Army took over the Republic during the Clone Wars, created by Pente Patrol Star Wars. Be sure to check him out, links in the description, and I cannot wait to see what he's coming up with for this What If, so let's jump right in.
Hello.
Our
Hello
story
there.
begins inside of a command center on the front lines.
Okay.
This meeting was a secret. No one other than these few clone commanders knew about it. They slowly entered the room one at a time. This command center was at the forward command post for the Republic's efforts as they prepared to move into the Outer Rim.
Okay.
Each commander moved in and took up different positions all around the room.
Commander Cody.
All of them were curious as to why they'd been called here in the middle of the night. One of the commanders stepped up and expressed distaste in the actions of the Republic and how their inaction during this conflict had caused many great hardships for the clones.
Okay.
Many of these commanders had gotten reports from their own men informing them that they were struggling with the current direction of this war.
Okay.
It felt like it was never going to end, and the troopers were starting to question themselves, not their loyalties.
Yeah, it felt like that because of Palpatine, because, you know, he was making it being prolonged, so.
Or why they were fighting, but they weren't totally sure why they were being treated like battle droids. Citizens didn't treat them with respect. Senators and representatives didn't value their lives, and the Chancellor was pretty much the same deal. The Jedi cared greatly about the clones, but they weren't a government. They were a select group of religious fanatics that served the Republic to fend off the Confederacy. One of the clones chirped up, asking then what was the point of this meeting. The clone who had called everyone in stepped
Who is
up. It was Commander Green.
Oh.
He looked to a few of his brothers that agreed with his original
Commander
points,
Green, man.
those being Neo and Bly. They stood side by side and told them that they were calling this meeting for a reference.
So Commander Gree, who was the commander that, like, led liberation or defense of Kashyyyk, right? Episode 3. Bly, he served under Ayla Secura, and then who Commander Neo. I do not remember which battalion or whatever the hell he was part of Legion.
As clones, it was their duty to serve the Republic, but there was a certain unease, especially from ranked clone troopers, that the Republic would not serve them.
Okay.
Aside from the fact that the war felt like it would never come to an end, the clones truly felt that if or when it did, they'd be casted off like nothings. Many clones reported
And that is what
harsh
happened.
treatment around 99's bar on Coruscant, aside from those who actually went to the bar to be with the clones. Many clones expressed distaste in the way they were treated by many of the senators they were forced to protect on varying missions. Many of these representatives wouldn't even say thank you, let alone even acknowledge them. There needed to be a change, and these three clones, Gree, Bly, and Neo, believed it had to start with them. They were put in charge of their brothers for a reason. If they didn't do this, they'd be damning their brothers to obsolescence in the eyes of the Republic government. Commander Cody, who had remained relatively silent throughout this, stepped up, asking what was their plan. Cody didn't exactly agree with the notion, neither did Rex, Wolf, and a few others. They had all received the same type of messages
all the cool
from
ones
their
are
own
there.
troopers regarding the harsh treatment by either citizens or representatives. But what were they going to do about it? Cody wanted to understand this motivation, and why they were thinking of usurping the Republic or whatever. That surely wouldn't garner them the response they wanted. Gree shrugged his shoulders, telling his brother that their purpose was a stratocracy. They would completely overhaul the Republic and use their own power structure to run it. At the top of the priorities was the citizen draft. These people wanted to treat the clones like nothings, then they should see what war was really like.
You know what? That's pretty savage, but also, like, yeah, you know, they're just using clones to defend themselves, and the citizens don't understand what's at stake.
Then this sounded like they were going too far. Surely they could approach this differently. Gree shook his head. As he pointed around, they'd all lost brothers and friends to this war, and they all collectively agreed that this war didn't look like it was coming to a close soon, correct? Rex nodded his head slowly, with some skepticism. Gree continued. The Republic gained credits from this conflict, especially their leaders.
Yeah.
What reason would they have to want to end this war when they were lining their pockets with war money?
Oh, that's true.
The system was corrupt, and the people, especially in the core, had no reason to stop sacrificing.
You gotta get the Jedi on their
they were
side.
mindless machines. Gree's voice broke as he yelled out that they were people too. They deserved better than this. They didn't deserve to be casted off like cogs in the system. The clones felt his sentiment. It didn't matter what Jedi General the clones served with, or their positive interactions with those Jedi who were closest to them. They all still felt the inverse effects of being a clone during the war. The nasty looks, the heinous comments, and the despise they felt. They were throwing their brothers' lives away for people who didn't deserve them. And at this point in the war, with victory feeling so impossibly far away, the clones needed to make a move to save themselves.
Okay.
Rex, Cody, Wolf, and a couple of the other on-the-fence clones looked to each other. How could they realistically disagree with that? It may have not been right, per se, but they were right. The war was destroying them, and they needed to find a way to end it. If they continued to serve without any true purpose or self-respect, then they would all find extinction at the hands of this government. So
Yep.
that left the clones with one question. What was their strategy? Greed called everyone in and turned on a hologram and revealed his plans.
Okay.
Being that it was the middle of the second year of combat, it would be especially difficult to get a full movement back on Coruscant.
Hold up. Second year, half of the second year, so just half a year left of the war. So we're half a year left to episode 3. Okay.
So it needed to be a coordinated strike. Luckily for the commanders, it wasn't especially hard to rally their brothers around this move. The difficult part would be the Coruscant Guard, but Gree had a plan for that. He was able to get
The Coruscant Guard are little shits. They're like super loyal little Chancellor and shit.
the Coruscant Guard removed from the capital city by calling a need for reinforcements from the core at Kidda Nemodia.
Yo.
This also came from a place of resentment. Gree found Fox to be a bit too loyal to Palpatine for his own good.
Yep.
So he decided to cut the middleman out and force Fox to see some actual combat alongside the Wolfpack, who had been holding out a siege on the planet for weeks. Kidda Nemodia was such a nuisance to take control over, but it was the perfect counter strategy. A bunch of reg deployments were moving in and out of Coruscant as the guard unit left, so the planet was very defended. However, the Republic Senate was also left without protection from their own Grand Army. It all started in the early hours of the morning. Many individuals who served the government were already in their buildings. They were preparing for their days of work, and as they were, marching echoed out through both halls of the executive and senate buildings. Palpatine heard it, and it confused him, considering how close to landing docks his office was. He stepped out of his office to see hordes of clones marching in, with varying clone commanders leading the way. The Jedi were present, which made him wonder if the Kaminoans had given the clones some sense of autonomy.
No.
They had not. The clones marched in without the intention to hurt anyone, as all their weapons were set to stun. But Palpatine used this moment to drive a wedge between the Jedi and the clones. He hypothesized very rapidly that the clones were doing this out of spite and of rebellion, and if that were the case, he wouldn't be hurt. It would also make his job of securing the galaxy much easier, because the Republic and the galaxy would see his reign as a return to normalcy without a stout stratocracy.
Okay.
He simply returned to his office and allowed the chaos to commence. Once the Senate commanders realized the clones were here for ulterior motives, they warned the clones before they fired upon them, all of the Senate commanders being stunned as the clones moved in to capture each of their representatives, their aides, and so forth. The clones were going to lock everyone up inside of these buildings. It would be their way to maintain complete control over the government while freezing assets or using them for something else until they could situate everything. Since Kamino wasn't known for its civics classes, the chances of the Galactic Republic collapsing was a really realistic possibility. But clones weren't concerned with that. It was considered a minute part of their plan to secure the government. They were going to capture this location. A couple skirmishes would start across the two buildings, but none were extremely deadly. Senate commanders were elite, but they were not clones. A couple troopers were hit, but none of them died. The Jedi Temple sent Sindralik and his Temple Guard unit, and they put up a much better fight. But for whatever reason, for the clones, hunting Jedi came really naturally. Surely that had nothing to do with anything. The day would be long and brutal. The clones, on their few days off per month from combat, were fighting for their right to be treated respectfully and with dignity. They fought the Senate commanders and the Temple Guards, stunning all who fought back and escorting
Now, why did the Jedi send the Temple Guards, bro?
them to their prisoner camps, where all the politicians were located. Before the Jedi Council, the small group of which was still on Coruscant, made a move, the clones created a message that played out across the capital city.
Okay.
It was a collection of commanders, the ones who had inspired this movement to begin. It was Gree, Neo, and Bly. They had speeches prepared, and they started one at a time, informing the Republic of this move and why it was being made. They continued building off of one another, expressing that their sole motive was to end this war. Above all else, that was what they wanted. But they also made it abundantly clear that they didn't like being treated like they were nothing. There was such a frustrated feeling for the clones. They weren't going to just stand for it. All in one go,
Makes sense.
they expressed that they were the Republic now. The government was the clone army. It would be a military rule that did not profit from the war, rather determined to end it. They announced that the citizen draft would begin, and how civilians that rejected their roles in the Republic military would be sent to prison with the rest of Republic leadership, the Senate commandos who fought back, and the Jedi who fought back. This was a final push to secure the galaxy and end the war. They had no intention to hurt the people or lie to them. That was all that needed to be said. The people of the Republic were concerned, yet not nearly as concerned as the people of the CIS. They were fed propaganda that these clones were evil creatures, bred to kill, and now they were going to be controlling the opposition government. They tried to call on Dooku to stop this, but there was nothing he could do. Tyrannus himself did not get a message from Palpatine about this, so he was left to his own devices. He saw that there were two sides to this, one where he could let the clones win and allow Palpatine to rise to power after the fact, or the one where he could curb stomp the Republic with a separatist reserve military. He leaned towards the latter as the Republic rapidly shifted. Inside the core at Cato Nemodia, Commander Fox felt betrayed by his brothers, but now for the first time that he and the Coruscant Guard were stuck in an actual battle, did he understand why they felt the way they did.
Yeah, exactly.
Despite remaining loyal to the Chancellor, he and his brothers were locked in on the surface, thanks to Commander Wolf using the Coruscant Guard as a shield of sorts. They were leading the ground siege while the Wolf Pack was coming in from the sky, and using the natural bridge formations to begin their own siege. Without the Coruscant Guard being able to return to the capital, the Republic was lost to clone control. However, that was immediately revealed to be a problem. Due to the lack of civic understanding the clones had, they had to maintain every facet of the Republic government without collapsing it. Luckily, due to the fact that they temporarily froze senator and representative assets, they were able to reveal payrolls to the people of the Republic. So what initially started as a hostile takeover became a sick revelation, especially for those who were suffering, because their representatives were taking in as many credits as they possibly could before this war.
Oh yeah, they're corrupt little shits. Now, I wonder what happened to like Padme and Bail Organa and all the senators that are not corrupt.
Conclusion. They watched the clones reveal secrets about the Republic that would have never been revealed, and while Palpatine was on the safer side, because all of his assets were privatized thanks to his former instructor, the rest of the Senate was not. The same people who hated Padme, Bail, Ryu, and Mon for their distaste towards Palpatine were the same people who rallied around them after realizing that they were taking pay cuts to help their constituents throughout this war. While they were still cogs in the Republic government, they weren't lining their pockets. They were using whatever credits they had and sent them out towards the people who needed them, which was a far cry from the senators who backed Palpatine. While these revelations were all fun and games for the public, what wasn't fun and games was the draft that went public in the first week of clone control.
Damn.
Across the core specifically, citizens were drafted from all walks of life. There were miniature drafts in the mid-rim, but once the clones in control realized that the mid-rim citizens were getting screwed over by the core, they made it a choice to serve, not a draft.
Okay,
so
nice.
mid-rim citizens inspired enough to join the Republic military could, but they were not forced to, like those selected by the draft. One might wonder how the clones planned on funding a giant military, and they wondered the exact same thing. A lot of their initial government work was just throwing money at things and hoping it would stick. Luckily for the clones, there were hundreds of thousands of blasters lying around by destroyed battle droids. It would have been millions, but they couldn't scavenge everything. Arms dealers who had been making bank off the war initially came in and offered weapons to the Republic government, which the clones took for their citizenry. The citizen military, or militia, did not have an official uniform. They were provided weaponry and boots. That was it.
Bruh.
The only reason they got boots was thanks to a deal Chancellor Valorum made before he was voted out of power. Inside of the Senate building, meetings continued between clone and Jedi leadership. It was agreed upon that the clones would be replacing the Jedi and the Jedi replacing the clones, or better phrased, because the Jedi didn't respond with hostility, aside from those who were in prison, they were given a chance to remain a part of the Grand Army.
Okay, nice.
However, the clones would be upgraded to generals, and the highest ranked Jedi would have to be a commander if they specifically served under a clone general.
That is very interesting.
The Jedi were actually pretty fine with that. Most of them believed they'd be commanders anyways before Palpatine did the ranks for the Republic, and this was especially true after their poor performance at Geonosis. The Jedi Council believed that this act wasn't necessarily the correct one, but they did believe in the right thing. Palpatine was in prison, and maybe that was for the best, because they'd become increasingly untrusting of him. If the clones were going to have their autocracy, one that didn't harm citizens,
Palpatine's in prison. That's very interesting. He just let himself get put in prison?
one that didn't become corrupt, then why not let them have it? The citizen draft was, of course, the big concern from the Jedi. But clone leadership explained that this move was one out of determination to win and for respect. Many of these people had wrongly berated clones despite the troopers being heroes of the Republic and of the war. They were enlisting the citizenry for the fight for freedom, not for some vendetta. While in a way it was revenge, the clones were being mostly truthful when they spoke to the Jedi about this, and so the Jedi agreed to continue serving with the clones of the Republic, regardless of who was their leader. They knew it would be a bad look for them in any regard. If they served or if they abandoned or even if they fought back, it would look all bad. At least if they served with the clones, they could be a part of the movement to free the galaxy. That was a much better alternative than simply hoping something would go right and staying out of the internal conflict. They did try and go and free their brothers and sisters in prison, but that wasn't going to be negotiated for now. They would remain there until the war was won, for having fought back against the clones. A fair trade in their opinion. In prison, as the war started to heat up around the galaxy, with the Separatists activating the reserve military and the clones enlisting millions of citizens for the fight, the Chancellor was sitting in silence. Palpatine was quietly meditating on the darkness. He wasn't one to meditate frequently, but he had nothing better to do, and he was hoping he could thrive off of the rising darkness that would come with more deaths. Everyone in prison was well aware of the draft that was coming, and how it would drastically impact the galaxy as it was. He was a patient Sith, unlike many who came before him. Sidious would ride this wave, yet there was something mildly concerning. The Jedi imprisoned with him were always lurking around. The temple guards weren't looking for him or trying to suck up to him, but they were always around, which meant he had to play his cards carefully. He couldn't have the Jedi catching on to his little secret and exposing it. Palpatine knew he could escape if he wanted, but there was literally nothing he should do aside from just wait. Politically, it would make more sense for him to emerge and rise to power than to try and escape and hide in the shadows. He needed to make himself out to be a martyr, so that's what he would do. Oh, poor old Sheev Palpatine. The man who tried to save the galaxy.
Poor Sheev.
Usurped by a bunch of test tube creations. He's the only one that could save them now. The Jedi, on the other hand, were sensing darkness. From where, they did not know. On the front lines of combat, lightly trained citizens led the charge with clone captains and lieutenants commanding them. The battles were brutal for the citizens, because all of their harsh opinions about the clones radically changed. The clones were no longer brainless drones that did without thought. And it wasn't like the clones sacrificed citizens to battle droids as payment for the mental torture. It was more so the fact that people saw what real combat was for the clones. Everything they experienced was so intense. The clones were hardened warriors, strong of heart and brave of spirit. They picked citizens up when they fell or were injured, and treated them as soldiers. These people were polarized immediately by the war zone, and they were forced to adapt. If they didn't, they died. Clone commanders continued leading divisions into intense combat with the Separatists, whose numbers seemed to have rapidly multiplied. But even with the fact that the war was just that, a real war, it did not change the resolve from the Republic. Dooku, at the point of transition within the war, when the Republic was supposed to begin its resurgence, now had to fortify what he already lost. This didn't make his life too much more difficult due to the sheer size of the reserve forces. But he did have to play catch-up, which really bothered him. But battle arenas in this new approach to conflict were horrid. The droids just had numbers, but with so many new troops, the clones were able to innovate, try things they hadn't before.
With Jedi those lightly trained citizens are probably more skilled than the droids still, so...
Clone leadership still working in tandem, all the strategies needed were a strong commander and general to work with. The citizens slipped into combat with relative ease, and it was all due to their clone leadership. The government, on the other hand, was struggling. The initial month of lobbing money at things and hoping it worked was fun, but now they had to maintain trade relations with the neutral systems and the Confederacy, while making sure planets didn't end up consumed by their own micro-policy making. Macro-policy, on the other hand, still needed to be processed, and they had an enormous budget that they had to consolidate. But due to the clones having so little support, outside of a few members of the neutral systems, they were left to continue budgeting improperly. The Duchess of Mandalore sent her close advisors to Coruscant to help the clones, because she knew they needed it.
That's cool.
This wasn't because she wanted something back from them. She saw an opportunity to transform the corrupt state into a more humanitarian government. While she would never agree with the war, she understood it was necessary for the Republic to finish. So, her advisors were instructed to help with the budgeting of the war, and for the humanities. Outside of that, policymaking could be done without large sums of budget increases or decreases. The most important thing to her was trade with the Coalition and Confederacy. Without that trade, it could lead to a government shutdown, and that would grind the entire trade surplus to a halt.
Yeah.
There, of course, were alternatives everywhere, but there was no need to put so much pressure on the trade system, especially during the war. Luckily for Satine, the clones were very quick learners, and they were willing to negotiate with someone who had been very kind to the clones in her few interactions with them. Inside of the Republic prison on Coruscant, the actual criminals started to get rowdy. The Jedi were trying to make a note of the senators and representatives they needed to protect, but there were simply too many. And then a prison riot struck.
Oh.
The criminals had been fully separated, and many of them could collect large sums of credits if they killed a senator, representative, or the chancellor and didn't get caught.
Interesting.
Sinjalik's temple guards united during the initial breakout of these riots. Palpatine was eating with a bundle of senators when it happened, and he vanished from their midst. As he was moving about the riot that followed, one of the temple guards saw Palpatine using the Force to choke out prisoners.
Ho 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 ho!
That wasn't very normal, so the Jedi put a hit out on Palpatine. Clones quickly tried to stop the riot as the Jedi gathered in force, and turned to face Palpatine, who was killing a couple more prisoners who tried to stop him.
Okay.
He was going in and out of his way to make sure that no one saw him do this. But the Jedi reached out, using their collective power in the Force to stop his blood flow, which initially worked.
What?
Palpatine could feel his heart slowly stop without blood pumping
How is
into
that
it,
possible?
and he started to feel limp. As he saw the Jedi, he used the Force to break them off of him, lobbing all of them across the room with a shockwave that none of the Jedi were prepared for. He fell to his knees because blood had been stopped from circulation and his body was reacting. At least he was able to stop the Jedi before they could potentially finish him. As he was regaining his strength, a couple prisoners gave him the Caesar treatment by shanking him in the back numerous times.
Oh!
She was able to fend himself off again, killing the prisoners with the Force before trying to make his actual escape. However, for many of these prisoners, the Chancellor was enemy number one, and the Jedi were now onto his act. The worst part
Maybe he should start using the Force Lightning because he's gonna fucking die here.
is, he was extremely discreet with his use of the Force when he killed these prisoners. As he was escaping the Jedi again, they pulled the same exact maneuver, stopping blood from moving in his body with the Force. And unlike the last time, they weren't in a collective group, so he tried flinging them off of him, which worked. He got a couple more shanks in him before he dispersed the entire room with a shockwave
How many fucking times is he gonna get stabbed?
that flung everyone, prisoners, guards, and whatnot, into the walls. He then got as close as anyone during this riot got to making an escape, but his wounds would be enough to eventually kill him.
Wow.
There was hope too. He was making a truly successful escape, but he bled out, and right before he hit the exit, he was stunned by a clone, shutting down his conscious mind, not giving him a chance to preserve his life through darkness. The news of the riot would make headlines, being that it killed Palpatine, Jedi, senators, and representatives. About 200 people died in the riot. It was a huge deal, but the news had to rapidly shift, because with the Coruscant Guard, Wolfpack, and citizen reinforcements, the Republic was able to secure Cato Nemodia.
Nice.
It was a huge moral boost for the Republic, because it was one of the last major separatist holdouts in the core. The clone government championed the work of their fighters, almost as a way to show the people of the core the way that they should have been treating the clones the entire time, to be at the very least grateful for something. Their decision to be neglectful led to this, and now, despite the resounding victory, many families would learn that their brothers, mothers, fathers, and or daughters were killed in the combat. This did of course feed resentment towards the clones for their hostile takeover, but there was also a sense of patriotism, because citizens were doing this too. It actually encouraged people to volunteer to join the military.
Nice.
But this victory at Cato Nemodia did not mean the war itself was any closer to coming to a close. It was truly a marker, one that signified the beginning of the real war. With millions of separatist battle droids smashing in the clone forces across the mid and outer rims, the war heated up and dragged on. It was a clashing of two real forces. While the Clone War up until this point was a grudge match between the Republic and Separatists, it wasn't actually real. This became a true galactic war. Tens of millions of troopers on both sides were funneled into combat arenas
Okay.
and laid down their lives for victory. What started as revenge against
Alright,
the
this
Seditions
is becoming a true galactic military.
transformed into a brother and sisterhood with the people who now serve with the clones daily. These citizen fighters earned their title as guerrillas because many of their tactics within clone ranks required them doing some movements that weren't exactly straight up fighting. In the year 17 BBY, about 4 years after the clones rose to power, the war itself was on the edge of coming to a conclusion. Much had happened in the years since Palpatine died, and the Republic transformed into the clone stratocracy.
Damn, it's been a
The
long
clones
time.
and guerrillas were true comrades by this point, as they pushed the Separatists into a small box, one that was pretty much impenetrable. Dooku had disbanded the Separatist government and the Council in hopes that he would have as solid of a resolve as the clones did, but he did not. CIS territory in 19 BBY started to shrink rapidly from entire systems backing out of the war to join the neutral coalition. This was also in part to Dooku destroying the Separatist government.
Wow.
Duchess Satine was still alive, due to clone forces protecting her planet from Crimson Dawn, without forcing her to join the Republic. The clone leadership of the
Where's
Republic
Maul?
called them even. She helped them fortify their government, and they saved her from Maul. It would be Master
Oh,
Plo
okay.
Koon who killed Darth Maul on Mandalore with the Wolf Pack and guerrillas.
Cool.
Crimson Dawn and Death Watch couldn't put up much of a fight either, and their ranks were shredded. When Maul fell, it was over for their little rebellion. Satine's survival had a huge impact on galactic politics, because the neutral systems firmed themselves as a powerhouse cell in the aftermath of an attempted coup of the banking clans at Scipio. This was attempted by Rush Clovis, who was not arrested due to not being a part of the Senate when the clones took over. The neutral systems were able to create a joint treaty with the Republic to protect the banking clans and divide their resources and credit so
Okay.
that they could no longer hold the galaxy at ransom. It took a year or so, but the entire banking clan empire was disbanded and used by the Coalition and the Republic jointly.
Nice.
At this point as well, the clones had released many public servants from prison, who were put into house arrest after a couple more prison riots broke out, killing a number of senators, including Bail Organa.
No! Dude, Bail Organa's dead? Oh, come on.
Public servants having been removed from power, the clone stratocracy only became stronger in the years since its formation. It was a true government.
I don't understand why the clones would put like someone like Bail Organa in prison. I really don't understand that. Like, I want to hear something like, is Padme in prison? What's with Anakin, you know?
The clones were only focused on winning the war. They, thanks to Satine's advisors, funneled an exponential amount of credits into humanitarian relief. However, on the war side of things, due to weapons of mass destruction already being in production, there were new toys for the Republic fighters. Chief among them were Star Destroyers. These
Ooh.
hulking battleships were the ultimate counter to the CIS Navy. Because Dooku funneled out so many units with their war machine, he never paid attention to innovation. He believed that more numbers would win. But nothing, and I mean nothing in the Separatist arsenal could stand up to the Imperial One destroyers.
Quality
These
over quantity,
battleships
man.
could fully salvo two providences at the exact same time on either side of them and come out victorious. With expert gunners transferring from Venators to Republic Star Destroyers, there was nothing the Separatists could do in the sky. They mounted up everything they had, but everything wasn't enough for them. They couldn't stop the growth of the Republic military, and as Foundry planets started to fall into Republic control, the fate of the Separatist movement remained on their final stand. Now, this isn't to say that the CIS didn't strike at Coruscant. They did, twice. The first time was a struggle, the second battle was a rout. The clones had caught wind of a second strike due to guerrilla spies, and they pampered the Coruscant defense fleet with the Star Destroyers, and there was nothing the CIS could do when they arrived. They didn't even secure the fighter superiority, because the Republic still used Venators as their carriers. With strategies changing and evolving and a wave of Separatist refugees retreating to the final holdout for the CIS, the stage was set for combat. It was located just south of Hutt Space, and the Separatists secured it for its foundries, space stations, and ground-to-space artillery cannons. This battle would be one of attrition, and the Republic had already lost here numerous times. Admiral Trench's defense kept the Republic out,
Admiral
as he was
Trench,
studying
yeah.
a collection of Republic officers who were killed in combat at this planet. Dooku and Trench waited eagerly for the battle. Dooku knew Grievous would have loved to have been here for this final fight. It was a shame he was bested by Tano and Skywalker the year before.
Oh.
Regardless, the
Okay.
stage was set. Refugee ships were landed on the surface, and the CIS battleships readied their shields, as the hypervelocity cannons on the
Grievous is
surface
dead.
primed their weaponry for the siege. The scanners started to buzz excitedly as a Republic fleet dropped out of hyperspace. It was massive. Dozens of Republic destroyers, Venators, and support ships.
Fucking hell.
Due to these CIS systems being surrounded by the Republic on all sides, they were able to mount up their warriors without having to worry about surrendering other locations. Many of the former CIS worlds were not prone to resistance as was. The Grand Admiral of the Republic fleet, Lauren himself, stood at the ready as his troopers got prepared. Behind their fleet were dozens of acclimators, prepared to dispense their troopers to the surface. Yularen blitzed right with all of these support ships as the main bulk of the fleet started to creep forward slowly. The hypervelocity cannons were just waiting for their chance to fire, but everything was out of range right now. Out from the hangar bays were dozens of Jedi starfighters, all of which being led by Commander Skywalker, who was, yes, a Jedi Master. Clone and guerrilla fighters fled from the hangar bays after the Jedi. The heavy cannons on the Star Destroyers unloaded as the CIS defense fleet prepared their defenses and fired back. The battle was on, and just as the cannons of the ships got to range, the hypervelocity cannons smashed through an acclimator. They were the only ships in range of the super weapon. What the Separatists didn't understand was Yularen planting these troop carriers in front of his fleet to deter the hypervelocity cannon from hitting the
Maybe they're empty, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're like, bait.
Destroyers. What they didn't know is these troop carriers were empty.
Oh,
they were manned by selfless astronauts.
I said it.
On the surface of the planet, a riot began. It started with pushing and shoving, and then blaster fire ripped out. The best part about a citizen military was the fact that they could hide as refugees.
Oh,
it was a strategy the Republic refused to use several times, and it worked because the CIS was completely unprepared for it here. The droids on the surface fought off the guerrillas, but they continued mounting up forces. It seemed like every refugee from the former CIS was a Republic fighter, and it was because they all were. This was a long-established plan, one started right at the conception of the citizen draft, and refused to be used until the last second. As the battle droids on the surface were pushed to their breaking point, the Republic started to break at the shields of the Separatist fleet. But the Republic wasn't faring any better. The fighter assault was going well, and the troop carrier defense was going as planned, but Trench condensed his fleet so much that it was just a blob of constant protection.
Okay.
Yularen knew to trust the process on this. With his acclimators vanishing by the minute, the rest of the fleet could be in firing range of the hypervelocity cannons in due time. The Jedi fighters got closer to the CIS fleet, but had to pull back because it was too well defended, but they pulled away at the perfect time. The citizen forces on the ground secured the hypervelocity cannon and started unloading them back into the Separatist lines. First, the massive Lucrehawks went crashing into oblivion until the explosions ripped out towards the other ships in the Separatist fleet. The firing line was...
This just reminded me of that moment in the Clone Wars where Anakin literally made a Republic Venator crash into one of the thingies. Like, that was epic.
And the massive surface cannons continued to fire, forcing Trench to split the fleet up and move into a counter-offensive. Just as he did, from the west and east, 2 more entire Republic fleets dropped out of hyperspace. There would be no escape. Yularen had lost too many good soldiers to Trench, and this right here would be his revenge. The Separatist Admiral would face oblivion, with Dooku standing right next to him. A strategy he had planned to overwhelm the Republic was repaid with a fighting force that upstaged the CIS in every way conceivable. It wasn't a total victory after this battle, but it was the beginning of the end. The Separatists couldn't stop clone and guerrilla fighters. There was simply too much to hold off, and the droid forces were destroyed into oblivion.
Dude, by this point, Dooku's like closing in on 100 years.
Damned by their programming. The fighting would cease in the coming weeks, and the resolution would be celebration. Due to the fact that the Separatist government was disbanded and the Separatist Council was thrown to the sharks, there wasn't a whole lot the Republic needed to do. The clone leadership hosted a celebration of the veterans and the soldiers who lost their lives during the war. There were still those who resented the clones, but they were far and few in between. Most people had seen the clones as heroes of the Republic, just as they saw the guerrillas as heroes. The Clone War was brutal to all who participated, but especially for those who judged the clones too harshly. It was a chance to face the horrors of war and earn respect for the clone brethren that fought for their freedom. After the celebrations and handing out of medals, the clone stratocracy would surrender their control over the government and hand it back over to the diplomats who still wanted power. Due to the fact that the clones exposed so many politicians for their corruption, there were very few who wished to return. But there was a bright side. An entire generation of people inspired by the perceived notion of the clone's selflessness rose to the holes left behind by the forgotten politicians of the pre-war Republic era.
That's nice.
The Galactic Republic was reborn as it was meant to be, and being that many senators who rejoined were ones that had nothing to be exposed, they rose to power the quickest. Ryo Chuchi would be the youngest chancellor elected, and she was elected
Where's Padme?
because this was the new era, the chance for change. The clones themselves were given representation, and there were more productive bills established for the clones, including ones that forced the Kaminoans to find a cure for their accelerated aging, one that would be found in due time. Though there'd be heavy bills for the Kaminoans to pay, because during the war there was a Tup-like incident where the clones had to struggle with a couple executive orders that they had found and read.
Okay.
The Jedi wouldn't see much change, as they remained by and supported the Republic with or without the clones. The galaxy was able to transition into the post-war era with relative ease, as much of what followed were peace talks and reconciliation. The Republic was stronger than it ever was before, and the clones proved to the Republic something it didn't know about itself. There could be patriotism for their own accomplishments. They were more than capable of changing the galaxy for the better. The clones just made it easier. The Grand Army of the Republic, despite their original intentions, would forever go down as the army that saved the galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story.
Fucking hell! That, oh my god, it's just such an epic what if, man. I love it. I love this what if. It's so good. Man, this is a 10 out of 10. Honestly, 10 out of 10. I'd love for this what if to maybe mention a little more around, Anakin Skywalker and the Jedi and all that stuff. And maybe, the Jedi should have discovered that Palpatine is a Sith. After all, the Jedi Temple Guards did see him use the Force. But it's not really what the story is centered about. Where's Padme at? I don't know. I don't care. She's a slag. So, whatever. It's a 10 out of 10 for this what if. I love this what if. It's so good. Let me know what you guys would rate this what if out of 10 in the comment section down below if you agree with my 10 out of 10 rating or if you don't and why.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this reaction, make sure to go subscribe to Pente Patrol Star Wars for more awesome what if content. And do not forget to subscribe to my channel, leave a like, and turn on those notifications so you never miss an upload. Remember that a new Star Wars what if reaction drops every single day. Join our Discord. It's in the description, and if you want to support the channel and get exclusive perks, consider joining our Patreon. Huge thanks to all of our amazing patrons for your support. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video, so drop a comment with feedback or let me know which what if I should react to next. Thanks again for watching. This is the way the Force be with you. Until then, I will see you next time.
Hey, you didn't watch it? Well, check out the video on the left side of the screen, which is specifically recommended for you, or check out the playlist on the right of the screen, which contains similar videos to this one, made by me, of course. Hey, remember, subscribe.